Alice Marshall is the author of young adult and middle grade novels, including I Am Still Alive, Rules for Vanishing, and Our Last Echoes, as well as Secrets of Eden Eld middle grade series. Her 2 adult fiction thrillers are What Lies in the Woods and No One Can Know. She lives outside of Seattle, where she spends her time playing board games, tending a chaotic vegetable garden, and wrangling dogs and children. Eileen Cogdale is our moderator for tonight. She reviews mystery fiction for the Sun Sentinel in Fort Lauderdale and Tribune Publishing Wire, Publishers Weekly, and Shelf Awareness. She has been honored with the Raven Award from the Mystery Writers of America. Eileen is in her 8th year as a judge for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize in the Mystery Thriller category. Eileen also has an essay on reviewing in the Anthony Agatha and Barry Award-winning book, How to Write a Mystery, co-edited by Lee Child and Laura R. King. And without further ado, please give a warm welcome to our special guests, Kate Alice Marshall and Eileen Cogdale. First, can you hear me? Is it on? No. We can hear you. There we go. First of all, thank you all for coming. I love libraries. I spent most of my childhood in a library. I love readers, and I appreciate you all coming. This is a fantastic book. I reviewed it for the Sun Sentinel last Sunday. I'm sure you all don't get the Sun Sentinel way up here, but it is online. So I got it. I'm just thinking a terrific book. One of the things that's not in her bio is that Kate met her husband playing Dungeons and Dragons. And she's still a fan of gaming.
Yeah, we met in high school. Was actually Mike was in a class with my brother, and my brother mentioned, "Oh, my sister plays Dungeons and Dragons," and Mike was like, "All right, well, she's gonna come join my game." And it took us a little while longer before that actually happened, and then it took us 7 more years to start dating. But that is our origin story.
I love that. I love that. I like to start these interviews with taking an author back to the beginning of their career as an author. Tell us about your background and what you were doing before you became an author.
Not much is the answer. My mother is a writer, and I wanted to be just like her as a kid. And so I think that with the brief exception of when I wanted to be a marine biologist because I thought that then I could have a pet otter, I have always wanted to be a writer and be like her. And then I had grand ambitions. And so I started trying to write and get published when I was still a preteen. And I never wanted to have to do anything else. And so I just kept driving at it. And I did have other jobs along the way. I did the classic barista thing. But most of what I did was start picking up contract work writing for like mobile video games and stuff like that. So nothing deep or narratively fulfilling, but it was still technically a writing job. And then I started to get my first book, which is actually under a pen name, came out in 2015. And it was a while longer before I could say that it was approaching anything like a living. But during that time, I just kept picking up those little short-term jobs and contract gigs so that I could focus on making that work. And luckily, Mike, my husband, was incredibly supportive. He knew what he was getting into from the start. So, and we had a baby at home, and so I was able to write and take care of the baby so that we didn't have the daycare expenses and stuff like that. So we patchworked it through until it started to take off.
Absolutely. Now, you started as an author of middle school and young adult books. What inspired you to write these type of books? What drew you to that genre?
I have always kind of ping-ponged between a lot of different categories and genres because I'll read something I love and I'm like, oh, I want to do something like that. And so I just have these magpie tendencies where I want to eventually write everything. So I started, my first published books were actually Regency romances. And before that, I had written both adult science fiction and fantasy and a young adult paranormal book that didn't sell. And so it's been just kind of a back and forth between whatever looked shiny at the moment. And now that I can write all of them, and I have the incredible privilege to have those categories all kind of active right now, it's a real joy to be able to move between the age categories. And it's really helped me realize what I was getting from each type of book. And so when I started to write middle grade, for example, which was new to me, the experience of having to enter into a preteen headspace it strips away any sense of cynicism and remove from your emotions, because you can't write an authentic 12-year-old and be like a grumpy 30-year-old and be that removed from the raw emotion of being a kid. And so like middle grade books, for instance, are the ones where they're the only ones that I can actually make myself cry writing, because you have to feel that so intensely. So I love them for that. And then I love writing the young adult books that are all about coming into adulthood and finding your place in the world and starting to have the first sense of being able to change the world. And when I started writing the thrillers, after writing a number of young adult books, it was suddenly refreshing to be able to load tons of years of trauma into every character. Because, with a young adult book, when you have a teenage character, if you want to write a character who has loved and lost and it's young adult, that happened in the last 2 years max. And with the adult books, you can have 20 years of grudges built up. And so it's really, gives you different narrative tools and a different focus to work with. And so being able to move between those keeps them all very fresh for me.
Now, with what happened in the woods, which I came up 2 years ago, I think, you transitioned to adult fiction, adult mysteries is a genre I really hope you stay in. What inspired you to make that change?
It was something that I had wanted to do for a while, in part because I had some extra time in my writing year at that particular moment, and I never liked to feel like I'm just twiddling my thumbs. And I had been reading a whole bunch of crime fiction, and I really wanted to tackle the kind of books that I was really loving at the time, where you have a murder mystery and you have the thriller aspect of it, but the real heart of the book is about analyzing and taking apart someone's life and their psychology to see how did these people collide together in such a way that this horrible thing happened. And it's, I think, a really fun way to delve into some deep emotional and psychological and relationship issues while having a propulsive plot. And so that was that I knew that I wanted to kind of target that genre. And I had an idea that had been kicking around for a long time that I thought was a young adult idea. And it was about this group of girls. It was going to be like 4 or 5 girls who found a skeleton in the woods. And it was sort of a feminist revenge story with some eerie aspects to it. And it just wasn't coming together. I couldn't find the plot for it. And then when I realized that I wanted to write in this new space, I suddenly had the idea of making that be the thing that happened many years ago. And it, of course, changed quite a bit before it became the past of what lies in the woods. But that was sort of the first spark of figuring out what it was that I wanted to do with that space.
And there's going to be such different challenges between running the young adult, middle school, and then adult. First of all, you mentioned the years that you could build into that story. What are the challenges that you face as a writer?
One of the challenges is certainly finding the right voice for each one. And it's not as much of a challenge with middle grade, which has a very distinct voice as opposed to the young adult and adult. But when writing both of them, and I tend to kind of do one and then switch to the other one and then switch back for edits and that stuff, it's sometimes tricky not to let them bleed into each other because they are much closer together. And so you have to really make sure that you're still nailing that young adult voice that is, you're not just writing a bunch of 30-year-olds in, the text tells you they're 17, but it's obviously, this is just a grown-up in kid clothes, Yeah.
And do you ever plan to go back to young adult, or why?
I do have another young adult novel that's scheduled for next summer. So that will be coming out. And then after that, we have more that are due but haven't been planned yet. So we'll see what happens with those.
Well, I think that brings us to your latest book, No One Can Know, which is why you're all here today. Now, this is the story of three sisters whose parents were murdered. And when they were young, they were in their teens, and they've become estranged through the years. It's a very provocative idea. What inspired that?
So this was an idea that came together quite quickly. I had, here's a little interesting behind the scenes look. I had to start writing the next book. And so I had a couple of ideas that I was quite pleased with. And I sent them to my editor, and she said, these are not your next book. And she had very good reasons for it that I saw immediately were correct, which were basically, they were somebody else's ideas. I'd come up with them, but they didn't have my voice. They didn't feel like the same writer who had written What Lies in the Woods. And so she sent me this sort of list of the themes and elements and the feel of the voice and what she thought I did really well in the first book. And so like as a springboard for coming up with a new idea. And I had a very short little panic to myself, and then immediately got the idea of the three sisters and covering up something that had happened with their parents and the question of what happened to the parents. And I was really drawn to the idea of having multiple perspectives where each person was keeping secrets and each person had a piece of the puzzle, and that they would have to finally talk to each other, and the reader would have to be able to lay those perspectives over each other to see the entirety of the events of that night. And so I was able to bring together a synopsis that ended up not having a whole lot to do with the final book, but she was like, yes, this is your idea. And then I kind of just threw myself into it and produced the most chaotic, sprawling draft I ever have put out there, and had to wrangle it all back in revisions.
Well, right now, the domestic suspense, the family thriller are among the hottest trends in mysteries. And I think No One Can Know really clicks all those buttons. You've got sisters, you've got family, you've got very bad parents, you've got marriage that is problematic, so we say.
It's not great.
Yeah. And it's a story of all those things. What attracted you to maybe concentrating on a family as opposed to a private detective or a cop?
I prefer in my writing to stick with the more incidental and amateur investigator, because I like to have the existence of a crime at all be more of a shock and disruption in their lives. I don't want it to be something that they are accustomed to in any way, because of the way that I like to turn the screws on the relationships, the psychology. I just like the sense of someone going through something that is so strange and alien. I write horror as well, and that always feels more like it verges on the morbid already, like you're entering into a world where the rules have been suspended. And so that's an atmosphere that I think lends itself more to the amateur who's drawn into it.
Now, your heroine is Emma. She's the middle child of this family. And she and her husband, Nathan, he does something really, I just would slanting how about that, because they're forced to move back to her childhood home, which has been vacant ever since her parents were murdered, which was 14 years ago. Your book kind of works on several levels as a creepy, haunted house. And right now, I don't know if you see on Facebook, but the abandoned home, the abandoned mansions, those are like the big thing right now on Facebook. Everyone's posting, I think, because of the Gilded Age, and you saw these wonderful mansions and then that were just abandoned. Let's talk about that creep factor of the house.
Well, I love a haunted house.
Who doesn't?
And I think that house works really well as a physical space that represents everything that the sisters have put on hold, and that everything that they ran away from is still there under sheets. And they haven't actually dealt with anything that happened that night, and they have not dealt with their relationships with each other. And so I wanted the house to represent sort of their childhood frozen in place that they had put behind them but never actually processed.
I mean, it's interesting that people move out of a house and just leave everything. And nobody has been in that house except your caretaker. I found you just kind of had this feeling of, you still see the bloodstains and all that. Does a house represent more to you?
I think that the house is, it's just all of their secrets waiting to spring out. And, you go back there and it's not just that things haven't been touched. There's water damage. The stains are still there, but so is dirt and mold and graffiti from the towns that is, accusing them of terrible things. And so they've ignored it and ignored the fact that Emma was a suspect. She's just run away from it. And instead of giving them any kind of freedom, it's just remained as this chain around their ankles. And eventually they do have to go back and confront that.
Now, your first adult novel, What Lies in the Woods, was about three friends and took place in the woods, hence the name. And No One Can Know is about three sisters. And there's a woods very nearby. Is 3 a magical number for you? And do you have something affinity for woods?
Both of those things are definitely true. So the threes, it comes down to, as I mentioned, my mother is a writer, and she very occasionally gave me little tidbits of writing advice when I was growing up. And every time she did, it seared onto my soul because I looked up to her so much. And I remember we were driving in the car. I can picture every one of these so clearly. And she was talking to me about how when you're writing a relationship between two people, you're writing about one relationship. And as soon as you add a third person, you're writing about 4, because each pair has their own relationship, and then you are writing about the group relationship. And there are many more opportunities to create disruption, to have shifting loyalties, and it becomes a dynamic and unstable system much more readily than a pair does. And so I think I internalized that, and I am also the middle child of 3.
What Lies in the Woods is partially inspired by two very close friendships I had. So we were a trio who were playing these magical games. So it's both occurred in my life, and then that way of thinking about relationship systems has made it sort of my natural unit for storytelling and for creating characters. So I have to actively sometimes be like, okay, maybe we're going to write about a duo this time.
Well, you also mentioned to me when we were talking that as a child, I used to wander in the woods, gathering potion ingredients and looking for that and those magic doors.
Yeah, so I had a best friend and then another good friend who came along partway through this game, but we had this long-running, somewhere between like a game and just like a mythology that we were building, and it was very elaborate, and we made potions, we took notes on how to do spells, we hunted for fairies, and she had this big rambling land, and we would just wander all over it and into the woods and through the fields, and we had this unspoken rule that we didn't believe in the magic, but we really wanted to, and so we never acknowledged that we didn't believe in it. And that made it feel just real enough that like you could feel the mysticism around it. And that was something that I really wanted to capture in What Lies in the Woods.
Now, you collect fountain pens. And this, you said you can talk way too much about. And this kind of fits into your writing process. But you said you write your first draft in longhand.
I don't write the draft itself in longhand.
Okay.
I think that my hand would fall off. But what I do is I write many, many, many pages of notes, and I basically talk to myself to figure the book out. I don't have like a formal outline, but I do have notebooks that I fill going like, and then what's going to happen? Is her mother still alive? Maybe she should have a different job, just talking about the characters, talking about the events. And it's very repetitive. I go over the same things over and over again, but it's a way of sort of building out the image of the book in my head. And I do all of that with my fancy fountain pens, because then I can keep it interesting and reward myself with like, oh, I'm going to get a new fancy ink if I can get to the end of this chapter, and I'll try out that one that has shimmering in it. So it's like it's the carrot. The deadline is the stick.
And you said you once wrote a draft in 4 days. Is that right?
Yeah, so it was a middle grade book. So it was the first draft was only 40,000 words long. And this was when my son was 2 years old, and I was full time at home with him, and he was not napping anymore. So my work time was extremely limited, and I got called to jury duty. So my husband had to take time off of work, so he was going to be watching the kid, and I was sitting in a pretty comfortable air-conditioned room, not getting called up for jury duty. So I was like, this is the only time I have to write. And right after this, I have an actual, I think I was waiting on edits for something, so I was going to have to go do something else. And I have been wanting to write this book for like a year. So I'm like, if I am going to do it at all, I have to do it really fast. So over jury duty and then after bedtime for a couple more nights, I managed to just get that very, very messy first draft down so that I could spend I have to draft in big chunks. I can revise in little sips, but I have to get the draft down all at once. So that was the goal.
What comes first for you? Character, plot, or setting? Now, I thought your characters, I love the fact that you go back through the different characters for their points of view. You see 3 different points of view. I also love the plot that you brought in. And I love the setting, which is Arden Park.
Arden Hills.
Arden Hills. It's been a while since which seems like such an idyllic place, but it seems like a very terrifying small town. So which comes first in all that?
I think that it's probably an intersection between character and plot. The thing that always comes to me first, and what becomes my the guideposts as I draft, are they're not quite the turning points in the story, but they are the moments that like make your stomach drop. The big reveals, or a moment where the romance is fulfilled or a betrayal is discovered. They're the sort of iconic moments of the book that I want the reader to remember. And those are what build the book for me in my mind. And when I heard like 3 or 4 of those that have come to me, I know that I'm probably ready to start working on the book, because I know what the big emotional moments are going to be. And then I work backwards from there. And they are very closely intertwined with character, because it is about the character change and the character emotion. But they're not quite that, because then I build the character around that. I want the character who is going to experience that moment most powerfully, and who is going to make the decisions that will bring them to that point. So I start with those, and then I sort of reverse engineer character and plot to get to them.
Cool. I so believe that those girls were sisters, and that those adult women were sisters. Did you do any research about sisters and family dynamics?
Not more than observations throughout my life. And I am a middle child, so I have an older brother and a younger sister. And so I did think a lot about how our dynamics have played out. One of the things that really interests me is my sister is 5 years younger and my brother is 18 months older. And so my brother and I, in many ways, came up in the same family. And my sister came up in the same family, but different, because we were in a different state. We were in a different financial situation. And so I was interested in the idea of how each of those girls was in the same house with the same parents and experiencing a very different version of their own childhoods. And I am always interested in, I love reading biographies that are very intimate and look at domestic life and things like that. And so just over many years of reading and knowing people and talking about people, those are dynamics that I have been interested in and just filing away little bit by little bit.
Do you do any research? And then in the process of researching, what's the funniest, strangest, or oddest thing you've come across? Maybe even something you couldn't use in a book.
Well, it's kind of a running joke with my husband at this point that whenever I do a whole bunch of research for a book, I don't end up writing it. So I've researched very intensely things like Arctic expeditions and cave diving, and things like that. And then just the opportunity did not present itself to write that book. And so now I feel like it's like jinxed. And so I'll do my research only after I've established the book. So I do brief research, get into it, and then when it feels like it's inevitable, I'll do all of the necessary bits. In other books, especially in my supernatural young adult books, for example, the setting is extremely important and very impactful on the plot. For example, in Rules for Vanishing, they're going down a road to that came up out of nowhere. And each time they come to a new section of the road, it's a different, very threatening supernatural environment. And so that became the force that shaped the plot and shaped all of the events in it.
You know, during the course of a novel or a series, characters have to change. They have to grow. And I would think novelists also change and grow as they become more and more established. How have you changed as an author?
It's a really interesting question. I have gone through a lot of changes and phases, some of them before I was published and some of them after. as I mentioned, started out thinking honestly that I was only ever going to want to write adult science fiction and fantasy, and I was going to write a big epic fantasy series, and that was going to be my thing. And in my early 20s, I had this sort of creative crisis, because I realized that it wasn't what I enjoyed reading anymore. And I really loved the stories that I had come up with, but I wasn't enjoying writing them. And so this memory on Facebook just came up from 10 years ago. So that would have been around the time I was 25. And I think that I had sold the romances by then, but they weren't doing very well. And I was like, I have no idea what to do. I don't know what I want to write. Everything that I thought was true about my writing isn't. And one of my friends was like, you just need to write crime fiction and horror. I was like, what do you mean? It's like, that's what you like to read. And every time you've written it, you've had a great time with it. So do that. Oh, okay. And I didn't listen to him for another couple of years, but I got there.
You got on track.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would not write about?
Oh, there's plenty that I would not write about, because I don't think that it would be in my wheelhouse. I think that there are types of stories, and see, if I say them out loud and then I do it later, it'll make people skeptical. So I don't want to I don't want to second guess myself too much. But there's a particular kind of sharp, witty mystery with very stylish women that I don't think that I could ever quite nail the voice of. I keep coming across books where the female characters in it feel like they have a level of polish and precision that I can only dream of. And I feel like if I tried to write that character, that people would see through me immediately. So I can't imagine not writing books where the people are at least a little bit a mess.
I love you. I mean, your shoes are very stylish.
I do love the shoes.
What's the best thing about being an author?
Honestly, it's being able to spend all of my time and make my work be about delving into my own imagination and live in these stories. I love the process of going from the first spark of an idea and starting to accumulate the details of it. And when you have the moment of suddenly feeling like this isn't just a vague idea, I can feel the shape of the book in my head. That's very satisfying. And just, every part of the process has its special appeal to me. And then it's, the way that it likes to torture you. But it's all that I have ever really wanted to do professionally, and I'm still just blown away that I've gotten away with it.
Well, we're glad you have. What do you want to proud of?
I think that what I am most proud of is on a in the big picture level. I'm very proud that I have had a vision for my work, and I have been dogged in pursuing it, and also very quick to be able to pivot and try a new strategy when things weren't working. I've definitely faced books that didn't do well. Those initial romances, they tanked, and that was really hard. And I didn't let myself just wallow in it at all. By the time we got the official news that those were not going to continue, I had thrown my heart and soul into the next thing. And that has, I think, been very difficult, and has been one of the secret elements to getting to where I am, is that I just didn't didn't let myself give up at any point.
I'm going to ask one more question, then ask the audience if they have questions. What's next?
The next book will be coming out in January, and it's another adult thriller. It has a tentative title right now that I don't know if I can say on camera, but the working title, which for some reason they didn't go for, was called Murder Cabin. Because I could not think of a title for this beast, but it is about a young woman who has gotten engaged after a whirlwind romance to a very wealthy man. And he invites her to his family's winter retreat on a mountain for 2 weeks over Christmas. And they are very skeptical of her. She comes from nothing. She was adopted and doesn't even know what the first few years of her life were like. She has no idea where she came from. So she gets there and they're all being a little bit weird with her. And then she discovers that there is an abandoned cabin on the grounds. And being too curious for her own good, she goes looking through it and discovers a photo of herself as a young girl inside.
Oh. Yeah. You got some readers on it.
And so look for the book not titled Murder Cabin.
It's a provocative title. I mean, provocative idea.
Yeah.
What and anything else you mentioned?
Yes, and then there is a young adult novel coming out in the summer, and currently scheduled for the summer. I don't think that has been completely nailed down yet, but that one it's currently titled "We Won't All Survive."
Okay, that's great. So I was going to ask your feedback from readers, but let's ask from readers here. What questions do you all have?
Sure.
Yes, ma'am.
So, being a middle daughter, and this is a tale of three sisters, did you put more of your personality in the middle child?
I actually split up little bits of my personality between all three of the girls, and I think that it's a little bit easier to do that being in the middle because you do get to experience being the younger sibling and the older sibling. And so I sort of took some of the little quirks and foibles of my personality and split them up. And that was part of how I didn't want to have a favorite sister out of the three of them as I was writing. And so I gave them each a little piece with me.
And you had a question too, I think.
Yes. Well, I have read the book.
Yeah.
Wow.
And I stayed up all night. I was only going to read a few chapters. And I stayed up till 6:30 in the morning.
Oh, and high praise. So I can thank you, and I'm sorry.
I have to ask you, I was dumbfounded because you have three sisters and you have then and now, and your organizational skills. How did you organize writing each section of the book and for each sister? I mean, did you have folders? Did you have boxes? How did you do that?
In the first draft, I used my intuition, which worked about 30% of the time. And this book ended up being, it really is a devious structure to write. And the first draft of it was, I think, almost 25,000 words longer than the final draft because I just had to circle around things so many times to figure out which perspective things should be happening from and things like that. And then I got my edit letter, which was like, this is great and also way too long and also it's a confused mess. So I ended up trying to just tackle the revision in the document and just muscle my way through it with little notes on the side. And then I had like a complete breakdown and ran out of the house so fast. My husband was worried and I drove to Staples and bought myself a giant cork board and a bunch of little index cards and push pins. And I did not quite go to the point of having red yarn strung on between them. I wrote every single scene down on the cards and lined them up in order and color coded them by what time period and what perspective it was. And then I was like, and then I'll just be able to see how I need to rearrange them in it. No, I think at one point I sat, there wasn't room for it on my wall, so it was just leaning up against the wall. And I sat cross-legged on the floor for like 40 solid minutes staring at it and not touching anything. And then just like slowly moving one card. So that was probably the most technically difficult revision I've ever tackled.
No, because as I was reading this, I would have to stop and breathe every now and then to figure out, and what you were doing, because I was seeing you in the writing and what you were going through. And then I thought at the end, about halfway through, I went back to read the jacket copy because I thought maybe she's a CPA. It works with numbers on there, so that she can.
Oh no, they wouldn't without F you're at.
That's not so. But you're not a CPA. You're a writer.
Use the index cards once you go with the index cards and say back.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have a question. I haven't read your book yet, like her, but I intend to. But a lot of writers today are writing like series with the same character and developing it on. And a lot of those are mystery writers too. Have you thought anything about doing something like that?
I've thought about it. The only series that I've done that was more than like a companion novel was a middle grade trilogy. And the process of doing that was really fun. I really loved those characters and also very challenging because I like to be able to keep messing with the beginning of a story until I reach the end of it. And it's like, okay, book one is locked. I can't go back and change that. And so it's not a mode that is one that I have a lot of experience and I think natural facility with. And I think I have more naturally gravitated towards standalones. But I wouldn't say that I would never do it if the right character came along. I think the big thing for me right now is that with my thrillers in particular, I take the characters through a whole cycle of suffering, and then I should really leave them alone.
Yeah.
They need a break.
Thank you.
Are there other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What does your mother think of your books?
She is a fan and one of my greatest supporters. And this book is actually dedicated to my parents, somewhat awkwardly, given the parents in the book, which I managed to keep a secret from them until they got their actual copy in the mail. I got a text message saying, "Come on." But she has always been just a huge supporter of my writing. Both of my parents have. And I really wouldn't be here without everything that they've done, from the emotional support and shilling my books everywhere they go and down to the babysitting. There's been a lot of that.
You mentioned your mother was a writer. What has she written books?
She writes short fiction. She has not been writing recently, but she has an MFA and she writes literary short fiction, absolutely beautiful stories about these the small emotional moments that change someone's life completely. And her name is Alice Marshall. She has a few publications that you can go look up. And
other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Christine, I have two questions. What are you reading now, and what have you read in the past year that you would recommend?
I was just going to ask that question, so thank you.
I am immediately in between books because I've been on a horrible reading dry spell, and then on the plane I read the book Whale Fall by Daniel Kraus, which is about a young man who gets swallowed by a sperm whale, and it's also about grief and his very difficult relationship with his father. And I went into this like, okay, this is going to be quite the thrilling adventure about a guy trying to get unswallowed by a sperm whale, and then at the end I was like, wiping away tears and feeling very, very deep thick. So I would definitely recommend that one to people with strong stomachs.
And what else who else do you read?
I read all over the place. This year has definitely been a year of doing a lot of market research. So I've been keeping up with the thriller bestsellers and reading a whole ton of really gorgeous middle grade books. All of which, of course, I'm going to forget immediately. So I keep a reading journal in part because as soon as anyone asks me what books I'm reading, I'm like, I've never heard of books. So I've also recently read, gosh, what was the last one that really, it's all just like a droning sound right now. I'm sorry.
No, I only have 3 or 4 books a week to review, and as soon as I'm done with it, because I take very copious notes, it's like, what, read a book last week? Oh, yeah, but listen.
I just picked up, I snagged a copy of The Heiress to read.
Okay.
So I'm excited about that one. Rachel Huck.
Right. She has a very good hand. I liked her other book. I can't remember the name of it, but I did, because
She had The Wife Upstairs.
that was one of them. And, well, so many books, I just read Hank Flippy Ryan, who's going to be here in a week or so, One Ring Word. And I highly recommend that book. So she's always good, and I hope that you all can come to that. Are there any other questions today? Anyone? Oh, yeah.
What is your writing routine? I'm always curious, especially moms that are writing full time or trying to write full time. Do you do it like a job, like all day, or are you kind of all over the place?
These days, it's very much a standard working hours kind of job because both kids, the younger ones in daycare and the old ones in school. So I get those core hours, and I usually try to start my day and get as much of my work done while my brain is still functioning in the morning. So I will set timers for myself to do writing sprints when I'm drafting, and then I've sort of calibrated exactly how much prose I can sort of hold in my head at once so that I can write steadily. And then the timer goes off and I switch to writing longhand and I write about what's going to happen next. And then I switch back to the timer. And doing that when I'm in the groove with a draft, I can usually get to my writing targets by a little after lunchtime. And then I have a few hours to do all of the constantly multiply other tasks that take you away from the writing.
Any other questions? I think, yes.
So you mentioned you met your husband playing D&D. What characters were you both playing, and do you still play together?
He has always been the one running the game. So he was the game master at the time, and I'm trying to remember what he killed my first character fairly quickly. But all of my characters at that point were very pretty ladies who stabbed things a lot. And so it was probably like a ranger or something. I love characters that have bows, so I'm sure that was thrown in the mix somewhere. But I tend to be someone who wants to create lots of characters and find excuses to go retire the current one so that I can create a new one.
If there are no other questions, I hope you all will either buy her book or you bought it and have her sign it. Thank you all for coming. I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you come to more of the Writers Live events the library hosts, because they're terrific. Thank you very much.
Thanks.